Hi everyone, it's Jenny. I'm back today with a very controversial book conversation about books that have disappointed me. I was holding off on doing this video for the longest time because I don't want to make enemies and I want us all to be friends, but the list is quite frankly getting a little long. So if we don't talk about it now, I'm going to end up sitting here one day and talking to you guys about like 20 or 30 books. So let this be maybe a part one to the rant. I will start off by saying these are not books that I hated. The reason I titled this video The Books That Disappointed Me is because these books are very clearly strong pieces of like writing and literature. They have very either exciting plots or beautiful writing. And I really, really, really wanted to love these books while I was reading it. And then one or two elements that the author chose to add in just would throw me off and lead to either like a DNF, like did not finish, or just a lower rating in some instances. Even scanning through this list, most of these books are books that I did not end up finishing because I just wanted to move on to another item off my TBR. On that note, that is also my goal for today's video. If you have a TBR that needs cleaning up, like I do, I hope this helps because sometimes you'll have books sitting there that are not immediate priorities and books you want to read like so urgently. And if they're just sitting there lurking, maybe this video will give you some reasons to declutter a bit on that list and prioritize some other fun books you want to get to. All that disclaimer aside, this is not hating on the books, not hating on the authors. I see like a lot of quality in their writing and in their collections. And these are just books that I wish went a different direction. So we'll start least controversial to most controversial. The first book I want to talk about I don't think is actually that well known, and it is called Jane Unlimited by Kristen Cashore. The reason I was so excited for this book is Kristen Cashore is one of my all-time favorite authors with her Graceling universe and series. So those books are like Graceling, Fire, which is in my all-time favorite books, Bitter Blue, and there's more that I think continue to come out to this day. So I've been reading these since I was in like middle school. For the longest time, Jane Unlimited had been on my radar because it was like different to her YA fantasy genre. And I knew that she wrote this kind of contemporary fiction piece and I really, really wanted to try it. So what this book is about is, Jane, as pretty self-explanatory, and she's basically grappling with the passing of her aunt who she was very close to. And as she is experiencing this grief, she gets invited to this property or party called Tu Reviens, and basically it's this like, I think it's like a private island or mansion of sorts, that kind of, you know, like rich, mysterious, like gathering of characters. So it almost seems like the setup of like a Knives Out type movie. And before her aunt had passed, she had always made Jane promise that if she got invited to this Tu Reviens event, she would always accept the invite. So that's where she finds herself. This story ends up being a bit of a mystery, told in pieces, and it actually builds in this element of a choose your own adventure. So the first part of the story sets up the setting, the premise, the characters, and then you get to choose which chapter to flip to read the rest of the story, or which part, I guess. I did read the entire introduction and first part I chose, but I was curious in going back to the other parts to re-experience the story in different scenarios and different perspectives. But ultimately, I couldn't get through like a second part of that book, and I think there were multiple other scenarios to choose from. I think it just got quite repetitive and it failed to capture me in the story fully, so I just didn't really need to see where else this scenario was leading. Ultimately, it fell kind of flat. It was a DNF for me. I guess I did finish one portion of the story, so I'll reward myself with that, but that was literally it. It was just underwhelming and it was disappointing for me because it was one of my all-time favorite authors. The second book I want to talk about, this is also not controversial because I've seen quite a bit of discourse online for this, and it is a nonfiction book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. This man and his books haunt all of us, I'm sure, in the bestseller lists. I thought it was going to be very interesting because I did study business in uni, and his books are all over the place in that community there. And it sounded genuinely interesting. The Tipping Point is about how one small action or one small event can lead to a trickle down effect and inspire like larger movements and larger changes in the world. So basically, examples given in the direct summary of the book is how one person who is sick can lead to an entire epidemic or flu. One person trying something cool with fashion can lead to an entire trend that influences the industry for a whole season or multiple years. All of that. The big issue with this book, and this is not an unpopular opinion to my knowledge, is that his writing and the points he's trying to make come off a little too strongly. So this book is written in passages of chapters of different examples that have happened in the real world. So I think one of them is, and I hope I'm remembering the right book, but one of them is like Sesame Street and children's television, or he uses a bunch of different examples to illustrate this one point about the tipping point. However, the examples become very convenient and very biased against his one point. And this is quite common in some nonfiction books I've read. They're clearly trying to bring forward one thesis and one hypothesis and just prove it over and over throughout the book. However, there just wasn't enough backing with some of his examples, and they just ended up being way too convenient and just a bit too, like, he was coming off too strongly. And I wasn't sold on this tipping point theory and how truly fascinating it would be, because honestly, it's just felt like he was kind of telling stories about different industries here and there at times. So I did not end up finishing this book because it just got like way too repetitive with different examples, but just like the same point over and over in every chapter. If this is on your list, I would still, like, you could definitely read a few chapters and flip through, but I personally knew I would not enjoy going through the entire experience. All right, so a scary part is I'm now breaching on book talk territory and a book that was very popular in the last few years. And this book is Once Upon a Broken Heart. This was so popular for a long time, and that's how my book club ended up choosing it for our month when we had a romantasy themed book. This is where my take starts to get a bit, I wouldn't say controversial, but it's like, I'm not trying to cancel culture anyone, because I think YA fantasy and everything has their issues. We know that sometimes characters can be toxic, setups can be toxic, and we love that because it's fictional and we can enjoy it when it's fictional. To set the scene, where this book starts off is the main girl finds out that the love of her life is marrying another girl. She is deeply heartbroken by all of this, obviously, and is trying to find a way to stop the wedding, because obviously that's the logical path to take here. In the process of trying to stop this wedding, she ends up in this like mysterious, I can't remember if it's like a church of sorts, and she meets the Prince of Hearts, who is supposed to be like this very wicked, evil person. Essentially, they make a deal together to help her stop the wedding and also heal her broken heart, where she ends up promising him, this sounds so weird, but like three kisses at any point of his choosing. And it's not even, okay, so this is where the story immediately gets a bit weird. I didn't get too far into this book because it's not like, you know, first of all, consent issue is the biggest reason. I'm not even gonna dance around that. That's the biggest reason why I didn't finish this book. He is just choosing random people in this book for her to kiss and fulfill their end of the deal. So many of my friends loved this book and loved the second book even more in this series. So just know that there are like people who are fans, like very clearly fans on the book talk community as well, and in my real life. For me, it was just a bit too much of like the weird kind of consent issues where he was just like tossing her around and making her kiss random people. So I just didn't finish it because it felt a little off for me. If you enjoyed it, to each their own. I really don't judge you because YA fantasy as a whole is fun and problematic at times. All right, we are departing now from the lighthearted portion of this video, and we are now getting into territory of people disliking this video, giving me a thumbs down, and even unsubscribing. And you know what? We love the controversy, so I'm just gonna own it. In my earlier video on an introduction to literary novels, I already danced around this topic a bit, and that is books by Murakami, one of the most well-known Japanese literary authors in the Western world, though he is apparently controversial within actual Japan. I feel so many feelings for his books. I first started off with Kafka on the Shore many, many years ago, and I finished that book. I then moved on maybe last year or 2 years ago to Norwegian Woods, because that's the one I've heard is the most accessible and most easy to read. And I did not finish that book. And there are so many of my friends, again, in real life, who recommended me that book and really enjoyed it. And it is not a secret that this is like a very, very popular and well-loved book and author in the literary world. His writing is so beautiful. I cannot even begin to try and describe or mimic what it is. Like, it even transcends into translated versions that I'm reading, obviously. And I think he has such a way with magical realism that creates this unmatched feeling and experience when you're reading his books. However, this man needs to relax and leave women alone. I think that's just the biggest take here. Is it's not a secret anywhere that he doesn't know how to write a female character. And I want to keep this video family friendly, but I think first of all, he needs to relax around writing young girls. He needs to relax around writing weird thoughts between family members, super weird. And also, I think the part where I dropped Norwegian Woods was a combination of all of that, along with very aggressive homophobia. And it was just this one crazy paragraph of angry ranting with all of those topics included, and it felt very aggressive. All that to say, fans of Murakami, I have genuinely never judged a single moment. He is a great writer, but he needs to chill a bit and let women live. Or just I'd rather he wrote a book entirely with male only characters. The next book is almost identical to the reasons why I stay away from Murakami, and that is 100 Years of Solitude. I finished this book. I ate it up. It was wonderful. I think even after the disappointment, I'm pulling it up on my storygraph, I still rated it 4 stars. And it would have been a 5 or 6 star book if it wasn't so icky about women. And again, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a master of magical realism and just wonderful illustrations and visualizations in his writing. The imagery is so strong. The way he writes about this generation after generation of this family and how they pass through time is so intriguing and dark and tragic, and it's just an unmatched story. I really don't know how he created such a masterpiece. This book is the favorite book of a lot of my loved ones, and they recommended it to me, and I totally understand why. It's just, again, some of the subject matter where I sometimes think did we really have to go there to prove a point? Did we have to use some of these female and girl characters this way to prove a point? I'm not sold. However, I will say that this book is a lot more dated and older than Murakami books, so there is that excuse going for it. I know that in literature and in art, things are different and they're used for certain reasons, whatever, but I also think that at one point we need to move on from that. And again, I wouldn't actually remove this book from your TBR if it's still on there. It is a wonderful experience. Just know that there is a lot of ickiness that comes with it. I actually also did see that there's a recent Netflix series released that has been very highly rated, and I would generally try watching it if I do more research into it and see if they adapted certain things or not, because it's just weird. That's why I'm disappointed. It's just, did we have to be so weird? All these authors are just weird little guys, I guess. Okay, the final book I want to talk about is also going to address some pretty serious subject matters around history, and we're getting a little political here. Not gonna lie. I finished this book because it was a rom-com, and why not finish it? And it is Tokyo Ever After. This is a very popular, I think it's also YA romance comedy book, and it was so enjoyable because it's literally the Princess Diaries and What a Girl Wants, reminiscent of all of those early 2000s girl discovers she's a princess type story. And that is what it is. This is about a girl who is in, I believe, America, and she discovers that she is actually a descendant of the throne and literally the princess of Japan. So she goes back to Japan and goes through the entire process of learning, royal family culture, behaviors, like she's preparing to be basically the heir to the throne. We're not going to get into takes on monarchy, blah, 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 blah. The part where this book really threw me off is an unnecessary amount of asides and little features about, I don't know, the might and the history of the Japanese military during World War II. So as she's like kind of touring Tokyo and touring the city, there's a lot of like bits and pieces here talking about how much Japan and Tokyo suffered during World War II. First of all, Japan did suffer greatly in World War II, and we will not deny that. But the take on like the military stuff was insane. And I think that's probably partially my background being Chinese Canadian. Is it would be like the same thing as having books today published where we kind of glorify an oppressor of certain wars that are going on today. And this is a lesser known part of history. So in no way do I blame the author or the publishers, because one, I don't think it's very commonly known here in North America and in the Western world about Japan's stance in World War II, other than they were allied with Germany. So it's not very well known how many atrocities they committed in Asia against, like South Korea, China, Philippines. Like I'm only starting to list countries that were impacted. And also even in Japan, it is not taught the way it is in Germany, right? So people there do not actually recognize the negative roles of the Japan military and nationalist kind of impacts on World War II and what they did. For them, they're taught like it was a war and everyone was suffering, and they were the ones that lost very tragically, honestly. So all fairness, it's fine. There's so many factors that go into this that are very complicated. However, any glorification of militaries and wars and everything is super weird. It just pops up in so many places here and there in the book, and I just don't think that they were needed to forward the plot whatsoever. So it was just a bit off-putting. I don't know why the author felt the need to include portions of that in her story. However, if you are looking for a fun Japanese Princess Diaries core story, it's still there. It's just like very randomly scattered with some pro-military like propaganda or something. So I don't know. That's why it was disappointing to me. Okay, we survived this video and my many hot takes. We got some very dark and very political subject matters also for the fun of it. If you're still here, I hope you accept me as a person and as a reader, or maybe you're just fuming and you can't wait to leave some hate comments. But either way, welcome. Thanks for lasting this long. If you have other books that are very popular and have disappointed you, I would love to hear it, because I wonder if there's like similar feelings about some books that are my favorite books. And I also wonder if it's like totally dependent on culture and context and things that we might not know about each other, kind of like what I talked about for Tokyo Ever After. I think there's elements of books that can be received differently by different cultures that are directly impacted by the stories they're telling, and I always find that really interesting to elevate as a message on how people can view like these stories and these pieces of art in totally different perspectives to maybe even the mass readers that it's targeted at. So I would love to hear it. Let's have good discussions if you don't hate me by now. And I hope I didn't offend you if you liked any of these books, because again, I had a good time reading all these books and some of them I just couldn't finish, and that's okay. Okay, my next video will be a lot more wholesome and fun and positive than this one, but we love to just rant together sometimes, and I really appreciate you all for listening once again. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you maybe even purged some books from your TBR if that's what you're looking to do, or if this video got you thinking about some stuff, that's also a goal of mine. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.